Well, hello everyone, and this lesson is how to close crop an image with fine hair details that you can then add a background to and make it look like a seamless image and not photoshopped. We will then crop our images to specific sizes so you can see how to crop images when a specific size is being requested, and then the file types for each one of those requests, as we are going to be looking at JPEG, PNG, and EPS files. So let's take a look at what we can do for close cropping hair. And it's essentially magic is what it is. So we have opened Photoshop here. And because we're in Photoshop, we are going to open the file. We're not going to create a new document. We are going to open the file. So the hair file that is in your week 3 module. This is the hair close crop example. You can find this image if you look up model face in pexels.com, Pexels.com. And there are lots of great examples and high-end photography there that you can use for your projects. This is one that I chose because of the awesome wispy hair in here, and also because of the background. It's got great contrast here. Okay, so we're simply just going to open the file, and then let's take a look at our platform here. So we have our toolbox. If you click on the little double arrows here, you can switch your toolbox to a 2-column or a single column. I like to keep mine in a double column because then I can see more of my tools in a smaller area. And the tools we are going to be using today are this marquee tool for just showing you around Photoshop, and also this tool right here. This tool, object selection tool, quick selection tool, and magic wand tool. I'm going to show you how these work, and then I'm going to show you why we need to use one of these tools in this tool set for doing our close crop. So let's get started with a little bit about Photoshop, as this is an introduction to Photoshop. And if you've never used Photoshop before, you're going to get some professional looking results today by using the absolute basics and the magic of artificial intelligence, AI, in Photoshop. Photoshop has amazing tools now that allow you to do 3 to 4 hours worth of work like I used to do in older versions of Photoshop. And they've got this amazing AI that they built into the coding that allow you to do amazing things in much shorter amounts of time. And that's using artificial intelligence as well. So let's take a look at the Photoshop platform. So we have our toolbox over here. Other things that we are going to need, if they're not visible yet on your screen, you will need the properties palette, and you'll notice this looks a lot like the Illustrator lesson that we had previously, where a lot of these things are the same here, as in the windows look the same. They have the same names. So when you're working with and I have a lot of windows open here because of having worked in this in the past. So a lot of the windows will look a lot the same because it's an Adobe platform. So it'll be easier to log on and use other Adobe products because the platforms are quite familiar in their look and the naming conventions of their palettes and their toolboxes, etc. So this is a great tool to have open here, properties, because it identifies what it is you have on your screen. But another palette that I love to have open in Photoshop specifically is the history palette. The history palette is a necessary palette in Photoshop because it tells you the steps you have done. And instead of doing Control or Command Z to go backwards to undo, you can actually use the history palette to go forwards and backwards based on what you've done. So you can see the steps you have done here. So currently we have opened this file. That's the first step. So now let's take a look at a few of my favorite tools for enhancing an image and making some color modifications, because we will be going back to those tools after we finish this close crop. So let's take a look at the toolbox. So we have a move tool, and we can move this object around only once it's been created into and converted into a layer. We'll explore layers after we finish going through some of these tools. So the move tool is something that we will use a fair amount here in Photoshop. Other tools that we have are selection tools. So this is a marquee tool, very simple, click and drag a selection. Any modifications you make on this particular layer, this image, will only happen within that selection. None of the other pixels outside of that selection will be just changed. Okay, we have this lasso tool. So if I click and drag, this is a freehand lasso tool, so you can draw your own selections. This is very helpful if maybe you only want to modify particular elements in this image, like I'm doing right here. I just selected the lips, so the only thing that will change are the lips. Okay. When you want to deselect a selection, it's Control or Command D. Very simple, right? Or you can just simply click outside of the selection with the same tool, and it will also deselect your selection. Now, the one we're going to be working with to make selections for the background are these tools right here. So the default is the object selection tool. Then we have a quick selection tool, and then we have this awesome magic wand tool. Why is it awesome? Because it was actually the very first selection tool available outside of the marquee in Photoshop 101, when I first started using Photoshop, when it was first introduced. And so it's one of my favorite tools, mostly because it does work extremely well for certain selections over these other tools. Because you need AI to use these other tools, and sometimes it's not as good as it seems. And so the magic wand tool actually has better properties to it in that sense. So, you know, they're trying to add more tools to be more selective, to give you more options, but I will show you my tips and tricks on the best tools to use. The last tool we will be using at the end of this lesson will be this one called the crop tool. We will then use this tool to crop our images to a specific size and resolution so that we can save our files. But first, let's start with a few of my favorite enhancement tools. So we've opened a file. We haven't created a new document and placed the file. We have opened a photo because we're in Photoshop. So the idea here in Photoshop is to open photos, not create new canvases and then place images on it. So we have opened the file, and now we're going to use this thing called the marquee tool. There's a few more in this tool set. We're just going to use this rectangular marquee. And what you're going to do is you're going to click and drag a selection over, and I'm just going to do half her face and the background here. So you can see the results of the tools I'm going to show you by selecting only a partial part of her face. So the other thing I'm going to do is Command or Control plus to zoom in a little bit on that selection so you can see the results here. So take a look at the history palette. See all the things that I've done? I've selected and used, deselected. You can see all the steps that I've done in the history palette here. So if I wanted to go right back to the beginning, I could go right back to where I started. And I can choose different steps here. See that? It's pretty cool. You can see every single step you've done. You can go backwards and forwards in the history palette. So I'm just going to close this properties palette here by clicking on those double arrows to minimize that screen. So now we can see here our selection in the marquee, and this is not selected. So let's take a look at some of my favorite tools here. So when you're enhancing, it just means like, do I need more black in this image? Are the colors not quite right? Do I need to sharpen my image? So let's take a look at some of my favorite tools that have also been around since the beginning of Photoshop. So under the image menu, image, adjustments, I'm hoping you can see the whole thing. So let's see if I can get that within the screen capture here. Under the image menu, go to adjustments and choose levels. So this has been around since the beginning of Photoshop. And this is still one of my go-to tools, despite all the other tools they have given us and expanded over time. This is one I still go to because of its ease of use, first of all, and because it's a very quick and simple way to make adjustments. So if we take a look at levels, levels is showing us the amount of white, the amount of black, and the midtones in between. And you can see if I take this black slider at this end and I pull it towards the middle, you can see I'm increasing the blacks, see that? The shadows in this picture. So you can see the difference between the two images. So if you need to add more black, you can add more black. And essentially, it's not really adding black. It's actually just darkening all the available pixels that are in there. If I move over to the right-hand side and choose the white slider, I can click and drag and I can increase the highlights. Now, the problem with that is sometimes we end up with what's called blowout. So I've blown out all the pixels here, and now I have no color at all in those pixels. So you do have to be careful how far you go with that as well, but you can lighten an image as well. So if I reduce and eliminate the blacks here, you can see I'm now lightening the image a bit here. But again, be careful not to blow out any of those pixels. Let's move that back to the other end, and now we have midtones. What can I do with midtones? Well, if I slide the midtone slider to the left, I open up the shadows, and now I can see more details in the shadows. Okay, so this can open up details, but I can also slide it to the right, and I can minimize some of those details, but I can darken some of those details as well. And that's the midtones. So if I want to increase the shadows within this photo because the lighting conditions might be such that I have too much white, too much light, and therefore I need to add and increase the shadows here, I can do that here. And I can still open up some of those details. So I could be counterproductive and almost match it up again. Okay, so you can see that just sliding these sliders around, you can get sharper images. See how it's a little bit softer and more muted over here. Now I have more intense details. It's a little bit more highlighted. There's a little bit more, you can see more details in those. So this is softer on the left, and I have made it a bit sharper looking on the right by simply playing with the black, white, and midtone sliders. Okay, so this is a great tool to use, and I absolutely love this particular tool for enhancing any of my pictures. It's my first go-to. The first thing I do is take a look at the contrast in the photo. So I've now increased the contrast. So I'm just going to click OK here. I'm not even going to reset it. Okay, so you can now see the results here. Now, within this, let's take a look at another one of my favorite palettes, and that is color. So under image adjustments, same color palette, under image adjustments, let's take a look at hue saturation. And what hue and saturation is going to do, which I also love this tool very, very much, is it's going to play with the colors. So hue saturation is exactly that. I can alter the hue, the color, and I can alter the saturation. Do I want it more intense or do I want it less intense? And we can also change the lightness of the pixels. So right now you can see I'm working with master. What does that mean? It's going to play with all the color pixels in here. So if I just move this hue slider around, I can alter all the color pixels in here and change the hue values. Pretty cool, right? We can get, and it's pretty seamless. You can see that it's pretty seamless. So why would you want to do that? Maybe you have color cast over your photo because you were taking pictures under fluorescent lights and it appears a little bit green. So what are you going to do? You can alter the hue values a little bit to remove some of that color. Okay, the other thing you can do, I'm going to reset this to 0. The other thing you can do is maybe your colors aren't saturated enough, so you can saturate some color. So you can see how that saturates every pixel in here. Or we can desaturate it and we can even make it black and white. So you can see a great contrast between the color and the black and white. It's still color pixels, believe it or not, but it appears black and white by desaturating those colors. Okay, and then we have lightness, darkness, which I hardly ever use in here. I would use levels in place of that. Now, we've been playing with all the color pixels in this selection, but what if you chose a specific color? So I'm going to choose reds. We see there's a lot of red in this image. There's a lot of red pixels in this image. So if I use the color slider, notice it's changing everything that has red pixels in it, but it's left my background alone because it's yellow. So the artificial intelligence is saying, I don't read any red in that yellow, so I'm not going to make any alterations to that color because I'm not reading any of it as red. Look at the iris and the eye as well. It's not changing either because I'm not changing all the color pixels. I'm only changing what Photoshop is reading as red. Excuse me. So if I reset that back to 0, what if I choose blue? Do you see any blue in this image? Neither does Photoshop. Take a look at that. It's not making any alterations at all. Now, granted, let's see what happens if we saturate though. Does it change anything? We can just ever so slightly see some blue pixels in the eyelashes, which is typical that black sometimes has some blue pixels in it. And so you can see that there's some alterations being done right here. But other than that, look at that artificial intelligence. It's saying, hey, I'm not reading that as blue. And so no alterations are going to be made, which is great if the only color you want to alter is blue. Let's take a look at yellows for that matter because of the background. And let's see what happens with the yellow. Look at, I'm only changing the background and only very slightly altering the edge. You can see where there might be some yellow reflected from the background in her hair and some reflective tissue here because we do have oil in our skin. So our skin is reflecting a little bit of the light as well. So you can see there's a little bit of yellow overcast, and look at her eye. It's also altered the yellow in her iris here. But it's pretty much left everything else alone, which is really cool. So the AI, the artificial intelligence in Photoshop, allows you to make such alterations, which is awesome. So you can do the master, which alters all the pixels in that selection. Or you can choose specific colors. And we're actually going to use this later on to our advantage to get rid of the yellow color cast that remains on this image once we close crop it. All right, so I'm going to cancel that. And I'm going to, using my history palette, go right back to the beginning because now I'm going to show you how to close crop this image. So if I zoom in even further, you can see, and I'm using the space bar for the hand tool so I can click, drag, and move the image over to the right. Let's take a look at this image right here. We have a lot of fine hair details in here, and look at all that yellow background in between. How are we going to remove the background in between those fine hairs? Well, I can tell you I have spent hours and hours working on this very thing using an eraser. Yes, I have done this with an eraser tool, but now you can eliminate that and use the tools, the artificial intelligence that Photoshop has now added to Photoshop. And so let's take a look. So Command or Control 0 will bring us back to full screen. And now I'm going to click on, not this tool, these are selection tools, but I want you to choose the object selection tool. So we need to select the object in the foreground from the background. So let's explore these 3 tools right here. Let's explore those. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this tool and I'm simply going to click and drag a selection. Whoops. I didn't quite get that. So I'm just going to do a quick selection over this. It's terrible. But let's see what the AI does. Okay. See what the AI did? It went, oh, wait, I'm going to try to find your selection here. And I'm going to use that. So Control or Command D to deselect. Let's try to do a better job. My trackpad wasn't allowing me to get a better job here. So I'm just going to go around and I'm going to make a very loose selection with this object selection tool. Let's see. Look how loose and terrible that is. And I'm just going to make a very loose and quick selection. And let's see what the AI does. Wow. It does a pretty good job. Look what it did with the shoulders. It found the contrast between the object and the background. Now notice it didn't select the hair here though. I would have a lot more work to do to make those selections. So the object selection tool is great if we don't have a lot of fine detail that needs to be looked at as well. So Command or Control D to deselect that. Let's check out the next tool. The next tool is the quick selection tool. It just looks like a little brush. And I'm just going to click and drag a line right down the middle of this object. Wow. It did an even better job of selecting the model here. It grabbed a bit more of the hair, and all I did was click and drag with a brush from top to bottom. That's it. You can see it didn't grab over here because it ran into, see her straps? It ran into contrast, and so it stopped. So that's pretty cool. It did a pretty good job, but again, I would have to hold my shift. I would have to keep adding to my selection by clicking more spots in hoping to get those selections. And so I'm just clicking and dragging my mouse over those selections, but it's pretty crude. And now it's selected all the stuff in between. Okay, great. So it's done a half decent job selecting the object, but the AI isn't intelligent enough to differentiate the background to the foreground. So let's try another tool. Control or Command D. Let's select that magic wand tool that I started with when they first had Photoshop. And so right now, the tolerance set up here is 3 pixels, meaning it's only going to pick up 3 pixels of a color surrounding where I click. So if I click on her lips, you can barely even see that selection because it's only 3 pixels within that selection, and it expands to that. That's it. If I type in 100 and I click on her lips now, whoa, see the expansion of that color? It's going to select the pixel I clicked on, and then it's going to expand to similar colors within that pixel, that match that pixel, and select them in this image. Okay, so why do I like this tool so much? Well, what if we did the background instead? It's solid yellow. What will it choose? Okay, it's selected too much here. Control D, Control or Command D. What if we drop that back down, the tolerance of pixels it's going to select, down to, I'm going to choose 5. And now I'm going to click on the background. Okay, so it didn't expand very far. So what if I do 20? Ah, it's selected more. What if I do 30? Okay, it's expanding even more. Then with my Shift key, which will turn this tool into a plus magic wand, I can keep clicking and adding to my selection. So my magic wand tool has done a much better job of selecting the background and running into the contrast than these other AI tools. Okay, so the magic wand tool is still the gold standard for me for being very quick with backgrounds. Now, let's deselect. So Control or Command D to deselect. What if we had a much better tool we can use? We do. We have an even better tool that we can use, but you must have selected one of these tools in this tool set in order to do that. Okay, so now that I've selected a tool in that tool set, take a look at the top of your screen. Select Subject, select and Mask.